this tutorial, I am going to teach you how to integrate the Stripe payments gateway into your Django project. So what I have here is a README file which I had prepared earlier. It basically just outlines all the steps that we are going to take. And if you want to get this README file or the project code of this tutorial, there's going to be a link in the description, which is going to take you to the GitHub repository where you can get the README file as well as the source code to the project. Now, I also wanted to add that I am trying to build a community on Discord and Telegram. So there are going to be links in the description which will take you to the Telegram channel or the Discord server. So once you are there, well, and if you have any question relating tech, backend, or if you like to share resources or ask questions, we can do all of that there. And it's just a community that I'm trying to put together. So let's get into the tutorial. So all the steps are already outlined. And the first step says, show a demo of the base project. So what I have here is a base project, and I would just like to show you. So as you can see, my server is currently running. So it's just a very simple project that lists out products on the landing page. Now, for each product, you can click it and it will take you to the detail page to show you the name of the product, the price, as well as the description, as well as the image also, as you can see. And then there is a purchase button. So what we want to do is when we integrate Stripe, once a user clicks purchase, we want them to be taken to a page where they can actually, check out and pay for this product. So that is why I have this base project right here. Now, in your case, you might have something different, but it's basically going to be the same integration. But if you don't have anything different, you can just go ahead and use my boilerplate. There's going to be a link in the description that will take you to the place where you can download this boilerplate code as it is right now. So let's get into the steps. So the first step is or the next step is that we need to install and configure Stripe. Now to install Stripe, we need to run pip install Stripe. Now, as you can see, I'm going to assume that you already have your Django project set up and you just want to integrate Stripe. But if you don't, like I said before, you can just download the starter, the boilerplate code. Now, in order to install Stripe, I will just break out of my terminal and run pip install Stripe. Now, I already have this library installed already, so it's just going to say requirements already satisfied. So, and also make sure that you are doing this inside a virtual environment. Just best practice to build your project inside a virtual environment. So after doing that, I will run my server. Now, the next step is that we need to head to the Stripe dashboard to get the API key and publishable key. Now, we need these keys because when we want to integrate Stripe into our backend, we need to authenticate ourselves. We need to let Stripe know who we are. So I'm going to be making use of this API key and publishable key. Now, to do that, just head to this URL, dashboard.stripe.com/test/developers. Now, the README file is already in the GitHub repository, so you can follow along with me by opening this README file in a different tab. So once you head to this URL, you are going to be brought to your Stripe dashboard. Now, note that if you are not in test mode, I would like you to switch to test mode so that we can do all of this in a testing environment. So it simulates like a sandbox environment. Now, once we are here, I want you to click API keys. Now, once you click API keys, it's going to bring you to your publishable key and secret key. So we're going to be making use of these keys in the project. So the next step says that we need to add the Stripe API key and publishable key to the settings file. And then we need to do this using environment variables. So in order to set up, in order to add the secret key and publishable key as environment variables, what we need to do first is we need to install a library called the couple. So the couple is going to help us store and retrieve this. It's going to help us retrieve these values from our .env file. I'll show you how we can do this. So I'll just like to break out of my terminal and run this command pip install decouple. So after installing the library, I will just clear my screen and run my server. Now the next step is that we need to actually now import the couple in order to use it. So head to your settings.py file and scroll to the top. So let me just zoom in here. So scroll to your settings.py, head to your settings.py file, and at the top, just paste this from decouple import config. Now, after doing that, the next step is that we need to add these two lines right here. So I'm going to explain exactly what it's doing. Once you copy them, just come to the bottom of your settings.py file and paste them there. So we're declaring Stripe secret key and Stripe publishable key. We've declared those two variables and we're equating this to the config of Stripe secret key and Stripe publishable key. But right now, Django will still not be able to access them because we haven't created a .env file. So what I want you to do is go to your projects based directory where you have your manage.py file and create a file called .env. So inside this .env file is where we are going to be storing our secrets and publishable key. So this Stripe secret key right here is going to serve as a placeholder or a variable for the actual value. So inside the env file, we're just going to paste this and put an equal to sign. After doing that, we're going to head back to the Stripe dashboard and copy the secret key. Now, once you copy it, just paste it. Now, please note that you shouldn't leave any space between the equal to and the actual value. And note that you shouldn't put it in quotes. If not, that will give an error. To make sure there is no space in between the variable itself and the value. Now, after doing that, we are going to create a new item also. This is for the publishable key. So just copy the publishable key and then we're going to come here and paste it. So I will come to my dashboard again and copy the publishable key. And once I do that, I will paste it inside the .env file. So once you do this, just save it. And after saving it, we have our publishable key and secrets key saved. And then Django is going to be able to get those values from our env file and save them right here to this variable. Now, after saving those values, the next thing that we need to do is that we need to now, the next step is the Stripe checkout endpoint. We need to start writing code that will actually create the endpoints that will allow users to check out. So it says next, we need to set up the Stripe checkout endpoint. And it says import and initialize Stripe in the payments app views.py file. So what we just need to do is we need to make all of these imports. And I'm going to explain exactly why we're doing it. But just follow with me. So I will head to my views.py file, which is the payment app, and I will paste that. So we have from Django.shortcut import redirect. So I will just remove that line and import redirect here. So after doing that, we imported, we said from Django.conf import settings. We're just importing settings so that we can have access to our Stripe secret key and our Stripe publishable key. So that is exactly why we're importing settings. Then we said from Django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. So I am not sure this is needed. Let me just get rid of it for now. And then the next thing is import Stripe. So obviously, because we're working with Stripe, we need to import it into the file. Now, the next step is that we need to initialize Stripe. So I'm just going to copy this line and I'm going to paste it here. So after importing Stripe, we're saying stripe.api key is equals to settings.stripe secret key. Now, if you remember, in the settings.py, we had declared this variable Stripe secret key and it is equal to the secret key, which will come from the env file. So what we're just simply trying to do is we're trying to access that secret key here by saying settings.secret key, which is why we imported settings at the top. Now, after initializing Stripe, the next thing is that in the payment app views.py, we need to create a new view to handle the checkout. So what we simply need to do is we need to create a view which will handle the checkout. That is, when a user clicks the checkout button, where would they be redirected to? We want to create a view which will process all of the logic. So I will just come below the pricing view. Let me just minimize that and I will paste it right here. Now remember that I removed the login required. So we actually need it because we want to make sure that the user is authenticated before they can access this view. So what I will do is I'll just say from Django.contrib author decorators import login required. So after creating this view, the next step is that it says in the view, we need to first get the product using the product ID URL parameter. So I will just copy this line right here, and I'll explain exactly what it's doing. So let me just remove this and paste it. Now, what we're simply trying to do here is we're trying to get the product whose ID matches the ID that was passed into the URL. So if I head to my models.py file, this is the class that represents each product that you see on the landing page. As you can see, each product has a picture, it has a title, that is a name, it has a price. And if I click it, you'll see that each product, let me make sure my server is running. We have an error saying cannot import config from the couple. So the reason we are having this error is because I installed the wrong library. It's actually called python-decouple instead of just decouple. So what we need to do is head to the terminal and uninstall decouple. I'm going to say pip uninstall decouple. So after uninstalling decouple, we are then going to install python-decouple, which is the correct library to use. So I'm just going to say yes to uninstall it. And then I'm going to run pip install python-decouple, which is the correct library. So now that it has installed, I will just clear my screen and run my server, and that error should be gone. As you can see now, the error is gone. So now the next step is that, let's head back to the README file. The next step is that, okay, we've done this, we copied the product and we saved it here, and we pasted it here in the views.py. So this basically is the model that represents each product. So we have a name, we have a description of the product, we have the price, and then we have the image, which is a URL field. So that is basically what represents each product. So once I reload the detail page of this product, I can see the title here, I can see the price, I can see the description, the image itself, and a purchase button. So what we're just simply trying to do here is we're trying to get that specific product using the ID, which was passed into the URL right here. As you can see, there is the ID, then the URL. So in your case, you might have a different model or a different way you did it, but just make sure you get the product details here, as we are going to need to get the price, the name, and other details about it. And you are going to see exactly how we're going to make use of it as we go on. Now, the next step is that we need to create the Stripe checkout session. It says more documentation for this is here. So what you can do is you can open that link, copy that link and open it in your browser if you want more documentation on this. I would actually recommend that you go through the documentation on the checkout session, but in this tutorial, I already have everything outlined and we are going to follow exactly what I'm doing step by step. On this documentation page, you are going to notice that it is Flask that is being used, but in this tutorial, we're using Django, so there are a few differences between Flask implementation and a Django implementation. But for the most part, it's the same. So what we need to do next is I will just copy all of this and I will explain exactly what each line does, but I just want you to copy it. Now, once you copy it, I want you to head to your views.py file and then I want you to paste it in there. So now I will explain exactly what each line does. So right here, we're getting the product using a product ID. Now, the next thing is that we're trying to construct a domain called, I created a variable called your domain. And in here, we're trying to construct the domain of our current website. Now, request.scheme is just going to give us what scheme it is. For example, it's either going to return HTTP if it's a secure website, or HTTPS HTTP if it is not secure. Like for example, since we're running localhost, we're going to get HTTP. But if we deployed it on a server and connected a domain name like my domain.com or example.com, that would return HTTPS, permitted that you have SSL installed and all that. So that is what request.scheme gives us. Now we have colon forward slash double forward slash, and then we have request.getHost. So what request.getHost does is that it returns to us the current domain which is hosting this website. In our case, since we're running it on localhost, what it's just going to give us is 127.0.0.1 port 8000. So since the website is running on this domain, this is exactly what we're going to get in request.getHost. So when we put these two together, what we now have is your domain is equals to http colon forward slash 127.0.0.1 on port 8000. So this is exactly what we get. So we're just trying to construct this URL. And then this is going to work on whatever domain or host, or sorry, this is going to work on whatever domain you use or and wherever you host it. So for example, if I host it on a server now and connect a domain, it's going to be HTTPS right here, and it's going to be the domain name. So for example, HTTPS colon double forward slash mydomainname.com. So that is exactly what this line is doing. Now the next line right here, checkout session, we're just saying stripe.checkout.session.create. So we're trying to create a new checkout session. So this is where we actually start creating the Stripe payment session. So the first thing we declare is the payment method types. So we're saying that we want to accept a payment method of card. Now, if you hover over it, you can see there's a bunch of payment options here. You have Affirm, you have there are even some I don't know here. You have Amazon Pay, you have Cash App. So there's a lot of options that you could add. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to use only card because we want users to be able to pay using their MasterCard, their Visa card, whatever card they have. Now, the next thing is very important, which is called line item. Now, inside line items, this is where we actually now write the description for the products that the user is trying to purchase. So details on the products like the name, the price, and all that. So the first thing we have is a dictionary, and inside that dictionary, we have something called the price data. Now, the price data is basically the description of the price, the amount, as well as the products data itself. So we have the currency, which is declared first, and it is USD. So you could change this to whatever currency you want, whether euro, dollar, pounds, you could put it in there. And then the next is the unit amount. So for the unit amount, we're just passing in the product dot price. You can see why it is important that we get the products right here, because we are trying to get the price of this specific product from the model. So what we're now able to do here is say product dot price. Now, you might ask why we're multiplying it by 100. Now, what Stripe does is that anytime you pass in a price, they automatically like divide it by 100. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that whatever price you are passing in is multiplied by 100 to make sure that it is the exact price of the products that you want. For example, if the price of these specific products, now let me just head to my browser. The price of this specific product is 200. But if I just leave it as price of product without multiplying by 100, what Stripe is eventually going to see is $2. But I don't want that. Since the price is actually 200, what I'm going to do is multiply it by 100 to make sure that the proper price gets passed in. Now, the next thing is the product data. So this is where we actually now enter the details about the product. So we need to enter the name of the product. And here I call this product.name. Again, we're getting the name from this product module. So that is why I am able to see product.name. Now the next thing is images. So images here, this is where we now pass in an image of the product. So for example, if the product has a picture, which you can see here, we need to pass it into this list. So we actually don't need to do this. All I can just do is pass in products or image right there into the list, and it's going to work. Now, after writing the price data, the next thing we need to write is the quantity. So if, for example, you are building an e-commerce website and the user wants to order 5 of the same types of products, you will change this from 1 to 5. But in this case, let's just assume the customer is always going to order one product. So this is where we specify the quantity. Now, the next thing is the metadata. So the metadata is basically just extra data that we would like to pass into the checkout session of this endpoint. So what we want to do is we're going to pass in this metadata, and then we're going to be able to access this metadata in the webhook that is going to be sent to us, in the request that is going to be sent to our webhook. Now, you don't really need to understand what this is right now. I'm going to explain as we progress, and you are going to see exactly why we are making use of this metadata. But for now, I just want you to remember that this data that we're passing into the metadata, we are going to access it in the webhook, and it's going to be really, really useful, as you are going to see. So the first thing we're passing into the webhook is the product ID, which is just the ID of the product that was passed into URL. Now, the next thing is that we need to pass in the user's email. So you could pass in any item you want into the metadata. For example, I could even pass in the user's username. I could say user username, and I could say request.user.username, and this would also be valid. So you can choose to pass in whatever data you want into the metadata. But for now, I will just pass in the product ID and the user's email. Now, the next thing is we need to declare the mode. Now, the mode is payment. From what I believe, the other mode is subscription, which is when you want to create a recurring payment, like a monthly type payment. But for now, since it's a one-time payment that we want, we're just going to say mode is equals to payment. Now, the next thing we need to declare is the success URL and cancel URL. Now, this is why I mentioned that you needed this payment successful view and payment failed view. If I head to the URLs of this view right here, you can see that I already have them created, payment success and payment failed. And you can see I already have these URLs declared or created in my URLs.py file. So what we need to do is we need to create a success URL and a cancel URL. So what does that mean? Anytime the payment is successful, that is when a user has made a payment and payment has gone through and successful, where do we want to redirect that user to? Obviously, when a user has made a successful payment, we want to redirect them back to our application, that is our website, to let them know that their payment was successful. So this is where we need to pass in the domain of where we want them to be redirected to. So since we had already constructed a URL here called your domain, and it's just going to look like this, what we're now going to do is we're going to say your domain plus, then we're going to use the F string to concatenate all of this. Sorry, we're going to use the F string to format all of this. So it's going to be the payment success / the product ID. So what we're simply trying to do is we're trying to redirect to this specific URL here. So it's going to be the main domain / payment success / the product ID. And that is exactly what I have done here. So let me just add a trailing / there. It's going to be payment success / that product ID. Now the cancel URL, if for any reason the user decides that they no longer want to proceed with the purchase, that is, let's say they click cancel or they click the arrow back button, where do we want to redirect them to? We want to redirect them to the pricing page, which is this view right here. And if I head to the URL, this is my pricing page. It's just pricing / the product ID. So that's exactly where I want to redirect the users to, which is why I say your domain / pricing / product _ ID. And then once we've done all of this, we have successfully created a checkout object, but we haven't yet actually done anything with the object. After now creating it, what we simply need to do is we need to redirect the user to the page where they will now actually make this payment. So that is why we're going to say checkout _ session.url. We're going to return redirect to checkout session.url. Now remember that this is checkout session. Now, once we have created this object right here, Stripe is going to automatically generate a URL for us. Now, that URL is where the user can go to make the purchase for that specific product. That's why we're redirecting the user to that specific URL. So when they go to that URL, they can then make the payment. So there is also something I would like to call your attention to. Remember that a wrong product ID could come in from the URL, like as URL parameter. For example, a user could go to the URL and type something that doesn't exist, like, I don't know, like 10. And if I click 10, it's probably going to give an error saying that product does not exist. So you might want to write some, let's say, for example, try and accept blocks to prevent that from happening. Like, or you could use a get object of all for method for that to get the products of this specific ID. So that was just a something that I would like to point out. But for the sake of this tutorial, I will just proceed like this. Now, the next step is we then need to create a URL for this checkout endpoint. So I will just copy this URL and I will go to my urls.py file. But first of all, let me save my views. And then I'll go to my urls.py file and paste this here. I'm just going to say checkout path of, I'm just going to say path. And in there, the endpoint is going to be checkout forward slash the product ID. And then I'm mapping this URL to this create checkout session view. And I gave it the name of checkout. So we have successfully mapped that URL to this view, which we had just created. So I will save that right now. And the next step is that we need to update the pricing.html file to properly redirect to the Stripe checkout page when the purchase button is clicked. So what that means is that anytime this purchase button is clicked, what we want to do is we want to redirect the user to this particular view. And once you redirect the user to this particular view, the view is going to first of all it's first going to get the product, then construct the URL, and then create the checkout session. After creating the checkout session, it's going to redirect the user to the URL where they can pay for this checkout. So what we're just going to do is head to the README file, and I will copy this right here. And what we're just going to do is head to the pricing.html file. And in here, this is a purchase button that is always displayed on the checkout page. So what I'm just going to do is I will replace it with this URL. So we're trying to map it, we're trying to wrap it inside an anchor tag. And that anchor tag basically just links to the checkout view, the checkout URL, which is what we had just created. We're trying to link to this checkout view, and it takes in a parameter ID. And it takes in a parameter of product ID. So we are going to pass in the URL name and pass in the product ID. So once I save that, the next step is that we just need to test the integration with the test card. So let's just see if our integration works so far. So I will head to my browser and refresh. So once I refresh, it says reverse for checkout, no view. Okay, so it's basically telling us that it can't find a URL named checkout. So there was actually no error. I think my server just hadn't reloaded. So once I refresh, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to hover over it. And once I hover over the purchase button, you can see that there is a URL showing at the bottom. I'm just going to click it. And once I click it, we have an error saying we have to be logged in. So that is exactly what we had specified right here. So we said login required, meaning that the user has to be logged in before they can check out. Now, this is something that you should add into your program, because obviously you don't want a case where a user who isn't logged in or has some form of authentication to be able to check out, because then you might not be able to track which user it is. So what I'm going to do is I will just break out of my server and create a super user for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to say python manage.py create super user. So once I do that, it's just going to ask me for the username, email, and password. I'm going to type in admin. Okay, that username already exists. So I believe I can remember the login details. So let me just run my server again and go to the admin page to log in. I'm going to go to /admin to log in. And I'm going to put in the username, put in the password, and hopefully that is the password. All right, so I am currently logged in now. So what I'm going to do is I will head back to the base URL so that I can select a product to purchase. So I'm going to select the white sneakers and then I'll click the purchase button. So once I click the purchase button, you are going to notice that we are being redirected to the Stripe checkout page. As you can see, it's loading. Now, what do you know? You have the white sneakers, which is showing here, and that is the exact title of the or name of the product, which we had passed in here called name, and we passed in product.name. Now, the next thing is that you can notice the price of $200. Now, that price is there because we had passed it in from this place. Now, the next thing is the product image. Now, you can see the product image because we had passed it in here, product.image. So that is exactly, this is exactly what we want. Now, if we wanted to cancel it, I'm just going to click back and you can see that we are being redirected back to the pricing page. Now that is coming from this cancel URL. So for the cancel URL, we told you that we would just like to redirect to the pricing page. Now I want to show you something. If we do not pass in 100, if we do not pass in multiplied by 100 into this section, I would like to show you what Stripe is going to give to us. So let me just refresh my page right now and I'm going to click purchase and we have been redirected there. And what do you see? We see $2. So Stripe automatically divided the price by 100. So this is exactly why we always need to pass in multiplied by 100 in order to maintain the proper price. So let's just refresh. Now, once I refresh, I will try to make that purchase again. Let me just be sure my server is running. Okay. I'm going to click purchase right now. So you can see that the price is correctly showing right now, $200. You can see the image and everything. So what we just need to do now is actually test this payment. I'm just going to enter a random email. And for the card information, you can actually enter a test card which Stripe gives us. And it's just 424242. You just keep repeating 42, 4 and 2 until it doesn't allow you to type anymore. I'll just type that. Now for the year, you need to enter a valid year. I'm just going to say 12/28, which is the 12th, which is December 2028. And then I'll just like enter a random number. Now for the name on the card, I'll enter a random name. So it can be John Doe or something like that. Now, once you've filled all of these details, just click pay. Now, once you click pay, Stripe is going to process that payment for us. And once it is successful, we should get redirected to the success page, which we had specified in the code. So the payment has been successful right now. And you can see that it says payment successful for product white sneakers. So this is the payment success page. As you can see in the URL, it says payment success. Now, what exactly happened on the back end? If we go back to the views, we told Stripe that anytime the payment is successful, which is a success URL, we want to redirect to the payment success URL, which we had declared here. So it's your domain /payment success / the product ID. And that URL is here and it links to this specific view. So that view just gets the product and returns the response along with the product as the context. So we're able to grab that product and display the details here. So right now we know that our purchase or our integration is working perfectly. And if we head back to the Stripe dashboard, we should be able to go to transactions to see recent payments which occurred. So as you can see this, we see that the payment came in successfully. The amount was $200. And then this is the test card, the customer, and you can see that it is exactly to the February the 17th. So the payment came in successfully and we can monitor the payment from the transactions tab. Now, we have successfully integrated Stripe payments into our backend. Now, we need to do one more thing, which is very, very crucial for our application. The next thing we need to do is we need to get the Stripe webhook secret. and then we need to understand what a webhook is. Now, remember that I had explained earlier that we needed to specify this metadata object, and we're going to make use of it in the webhook. So now I am going to explain exactly what a webhook is and why we needed those details. So first of all, we need to understand what the webhook is. Now, I will just explain this from a practical standpoint. So I'm going to use this image to explain it. So this is our application right here. It is called, for example, let's say your e-commerce website. Now, once you create a checkout session and you get redirected to, and the customer gets redirected to a checkout page, what actually happens on Stripe's end is that a new invoice is created on Stripe's end. Now, when the user pays that invoice and gets redirected back to the website, as you saw right here, when we paid, we got redirected back to the success page, letting us know that the payment was successful. Now, Stripe does one more thing that we don't actually see. What it does is that if we let it, that is, if we define a webhook endpoint in Stripe, what it does is that after it has finished processing that payment, Stripe then sends us a request, a post request to that specific endpoint, and the post request contains data about the transaction that just happened. So, for example, once I make a payment, I get redirected to the success page. And once I get redirected to the success page, what Stripe does is that it processes that payment in the background. And once it is done processing it, it sends a request back to it sends a request to our webhook endpoint on our server, or whether it's our API. Now that server, or that post data contains details about the transaction. For example, the transaction status, whether it was successful, whether it failed, whether it is still pending, and things like that. And also inside that webhook data, we are able to grab whatever metadata that we had declared for that specific product. So, for example, I am going to try and go into this specific, I should be able to see the details of this transaction. Now, once I click it, I can view details about it, like the price and all of that. Well, I am specifically looking for the metadata. So as you can see, there is currently no metadata, but when we set up our webhook, you are going to see that the metadata is going to be passed in, and you'll be able to see it. So what we need to do is we need to set up that webhook, as you can see here. So again, to go over the explanation, a user comes to the website, tries to make a payment, a Stripe invoice is created. Now, when the payment is successful, as you saw, they get redirected back to the success page on our website, telling them that the payment was successful. And then in the background, Stripe is also going to then process that transaction again. And then once we have Stripe has a status, whether it is pending or completed or failed, Stripe is going to send that endpoint, is going to send all of that data to our webhook endpoint. So we're going to grab that data and process it. So, for example, now when Stripe sends a success payload telling us that the payment was successful, what you can then do is from the metadata, we can grab the user's email and send them an email letting them know that their payment was successful. So, you're going to see exactly how all of this works. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the webhook secrets from the Stripe dashboard. So what we need to do is head to this URL, which is dashboard.stripe.com/test/webhooks. So I will just head back to my browser, and I will go to I'll just go back again, and I'm going to go to the webhooks section. Now, once you are on the webhook section, what you need to do is we need to then create a webhook here, a new endpoint. But before we do that, we need something else. We need another software called ngrok. Now, when we want to create an endpoint, what we need to do is we need to pass in a URL which is publicly accessible on the internet. Because right now our website is running on localhost, and if Stripe tries to send that post data to us, it can't send it to us because it's trying to send to localhost, and localhost isn't accessible locally globally. For example, nobody in the world can access this project that is running on localhost except me, because it is running on my computer, and the only way to access it is to visit it in my browser. But in order to make this website publicly accessible, what we can do is we can use a software called ngrok. Now, ngrok basically helps us make our localhost URL publicly accessible. So I had already opened some explanation right here. So it says ngrok is a cross-platform application that enables developers to expose a local development server to the internet with minimal effort. So what that basically just means is that there is a way for me to make this my project that is running locally. There is a way to make it accessible publicly. So ngrok is going to help us generate a link. Now, once anybody visits that link, they are going to see our Django project being saved, even though the project is running on localhost. So this is exactly what we need to do in order to allow Stripe to send that post data to us. So we're going to generate a new ngrok link. Now, the ngrok link is what we are going to paste into the Stripe webhook endpoint. Now, when Stripe sends that data, it's going to be sent to the ngrok URL, and then the ngrok URL is then going to pass that data to our local host. But you are going to see how it will work. So the first thing you need to do is you need to download ngrok. So just go to this URL called https download.ngrok.com. Now, once you get there, just make sure you download ngrok. I'm just going to paste that in. I already have it downloaded, so there is no point in me downloading it, but you can see that it's available for different operating systems: Mac OS, Windows, Linux, Docker, even a Raspberry Pi. I'm just going to close that. Now, the next step is that we need to create a new ngrok URL to expose the local development server to public internet access. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the Django development server is running. So if I check it, I can see that my server is running. Now, the next thing is that in order to generate a new URL, we're just going to say ngrok http 8000. I'm going to open a new tab in my terminal right here. And then what I will do is paste the command. So ngrok space http space 8000. Once I run that, you'll see that it says forwarding. I want you to take note of this line right here. It says forwarding, and the URL has been generated for us. You can see it's a secure URL. It's HTTPS. And then it says it is forwarding to localhost port 8000. So what that means is that anytime a request comes into this URL, that is, anytime somebody visits this URL, for example, that request is going to be forwarded to our local server, which is running on port 8000 right here. So for example, I'll just copy this URL, and then let me just copy it. And what I'll do is go to my browser and paste it in. So once I paste that in, it's just going to give you like a brief warning information. It says this website is saved for free through ngrok.com. Be careful about disclosing personal financial information. Basically, just letting the user know that um, this isn't like a real legit site like that. Okay, now we're getting this error saying invalid host header. So what that means is we just need to go to the settings.py file, and in here for allowed hosts, I will just put in a wildcard to allow any item visit it. So once I check my server to see if it has loaded, so let me just wait for it to reload. Now what I can then do is go to my browser, refresh, click visit site. Now once I click visit site, what can you see? You can see that I can view all the products which are right here, and this is running on a secure URL, HTTPS. So I could send this URL to any person anywhere in the world, and when they visit it, they'll be able to access my website. So you can see that this is my local server, and I am getting all of these requests. And if I check ngrok, I am also seeing like the get requests coming in. So the only thing that it is doing is it is receiving those requests and forwarding those requests to my local server. Now, when the local host server, sorry, when the server responds, then ngrok is also going to take that response and return it back to the client, which in this point is the browser. So that's what ngrok does. Now, the reason why we need ngrok is because anytime we want to create a new webhook, we can't put in localhost like I had explained earlier. We can't put in localhost into the webhook URL because Stripe needs a live URL that it can send that data to. And localhost could be any machine in the world. So we need a specific secure URL which um, Stripe can access globally. So that is why we generated the URL using ngrok. Now, if I head back to the README file, it says copy the generated ngrok URL and paste into the endpoint URL field in the Stripe dashboard. So what I'm going to do is I will just go there. I will copy this URL which ngrok has generated. I will go back to my browser, and where I see webhook, I'm going to click add endpoint. Now, what we need to do is we need to paste that URL into this endpoint URL. So this is where Stripe is going to send all of that data to. So that is why we need this URL. So, so before we actually move to the next step, there is one more thing that we need to do. Since this represents the base URL for our site, that is, when we visited that base URL, we were just brought to the page. We are going to create a special endpoint or a special URL, which is going to help map um, the webhook endpoint, which we are going to create. So the URL is going to be the webhook endpoint, and then we're going to map that URL to a specific view function, which will handle the incoming post request. So what we need to do is we need to properly write the URL which we are going to use. So it's going to be the base URL /stripe /webhook. So this is just going to be the URL that we're going to use /stripe /webhook. So we can just copy that for now and then put that right here as a comment. Now, if I head to the README file, it says that optionally add a description about what this endpoint is for. So what you can do is you can come and add a description. I can say this is a tutorial endpoint for my YouTube video. So it could be anything you want, as long as it's descriptive enough to be understood. Now the next thing is it says select the following events to listen to. So now I would just like to explain what this is. Now, what these events mean basically is what these events basically mean is that at what point should this webhook request be sent? That is, should we send this request based on some specific parameters? And that is true. What we need to do is we need to select the event to listen to. So I want you to select the checkout session completed and checkout session field. So we're just going to scroll down to checkout, and then we'll click the checkout session.async payment field, and then we're going to tick checkout.session.completed, which is what we should tick. So just click add events. So what now happens is that anytime a new session is completed, that is, anytime a checkout session is completed, Stripe is going to then send that webhook to is going to then send a post request to our webhook endpoint, and then we are going to write a view function to process it shortly. And then also, anytime the payment fails, Stripe is also going to send a post request to that specific endpoint to let our application know that payment failed. Now, after doing that, the next thing we just need to do is it says go back to your views.py and create a view to handle this webhook. So we just need to click add endpoint in order to make this work. Now, if I go back to the previous page, you will notice something. You'll notice that we have all of this code written for us right here. So what we need to do is we're just going to make use of this code a bit, and we're going to make a bunch of changes to it. But the next step that the README file says is that we need to go to the views.py file and create a view to handle this webhook. I'm just going to, first of all, import CSRF exempt, and I'll explain why we're doing this. So let me just paste that in there. Now, you know that for all your Django views, anytime a post request is coming in, it usually requires like CSRF token verification for when, like, for example, form submission. When you're making form submissions, you need to add a CSRF token. That is the cross-site request forgery. It's just a way of adding security to our application. Now, when we want to create this endpoint, this webhook endpoint, what we want to do is we want to add CSRF exempt. because we want to tell Django that, okay, this endpoint does not require CSRF verification. So we're going to add the CSRF exempt, which is why we imported this decorator. So because the reason why we're doing that is because Stripe itself is the one that is sending this post request to our application. And we can just tell Django to completely ignore CSRF verification for this specific endpoint because we are going to perform our own verification. And you'll see how we're going to do that. So first of all, just copy this, and then I am just going to scroll down after this, and I'll paste it here. So we have called it Stripe Webhook. Now the next step is, it says next, head back to your browser and copy the code provided by Stripe towards the right hand side of the page. So what we just need to do is we need to copy everything inside this webhook. As you can see right here, we need to copy everything inside the function. So I will just copy all of it, and I will head back to my views.py file, and I will erase it and paste. Now, right off the bat, you will notice that there's a few things that are kind of missing, or some errors that we're having. For example, we have this error right here because webhook endpoint secrets hasn't been declared. And then we also have this return JSONify, which, if I'm not wrong, comes from Flask. Exactly. So from Flask, imports JSONify. So we're going to be making a bunch of changes, which will help us make this work. And I'll explain this line by line. So just stick with me. So after doing that, it says, now we will make changes to this code because it is written in Flask. It says first is to change the payload and sig header to this. I'm going to replace payload with request.body. So I will just come here, and where you see payload, I'm going to replace it with request.body. Now we also need to replace sig header. So I will come here and copy it, and I'm going to replace sig header with this. So I'm just making all of these changes because this is Django, and Django has some difference compared to Flask. Next, the next thing is, it says correctly passing the endpoint secret. So I will just copy this. And at this point where it says endpoint secrets, this is where we actually need to paste in our endpoint secret key. I know we haven't added it yet because we are going to add it in our settings.py file, which is going to be here. We're going to add it shortly, but what we need to do next is we just need to replace endpoint secret with settings.stripe webhook secret. So we're going to be getting this webhook secret from the settings.py file, and that webhook secret is going to be stored in our .env file, in our environment variable file, for protection purposes. Then it says next, inside each exception, instead of raising an exception, we will return an HTTP response back to Stripe. So what we're just going to do is we're just going to copy this and head to the views. So it said inside is each exception, instead of raising an exception, we're just going to return this HTTP response of status of 400, which is bad request. So if for any reason an error gets encountered, instead of crashing the entire thing, we're just going to return a status code back to Stripe, and Stripe is going to actually receive it. So you see that we're getting this error because we haven't imported HTTP response. So just scroll to the top and say from Django.http import HTTP response. I'm just going to select it, import HTTP response. Now, before I forget, we need to add that CSRF exempt decorator on this view. So once we do that, you can see that that error has been removed. And we also now need to head back. So it says replace the final response with this. So I'm just going to copy it. And then instead of return JSONify of success equals true, I will just return a HTTP response of status equals 200, which means 200 okay. That is, everything went well and worked properly. What I'm just going to do is then move to the next step. It says go back to the browser and click add events and click add endpoint. So I'm just going to come back here, click add endpoint. So it says the webhook cannot be empty. Okay, I am just going to go back and copy this endpoint URL once more, and I'll paste it in, and it's forward slash stripe forward slash webhook, which we said we would make. So just click add endpoint. Now, once you click add endpoint, what you need to do is if you go to the README file, it says copy and save the webhook secret in the settings.py file. So I will first of all just copy this, go to my settings.py file and paste it in there. Now, because I am trying to add this stripe webhook secret variable here, it means I need to declare it inside my environments variable file so that Django can actually find this this item. I'm just going to put equals to. So in order to get the webhook secret, where you see sign-in secret, just click review. And once you click review, just copy the secret which has been shown to you. Now head back to your env file and paste it. So we're going to require this sign-in secret in order to authenticate that the payload that is coming in is actually from Stripe. Now, let me just explain this view. Now here, where we have a variable called event equals none, and then we're getting the payload that is coming in, that is the request body, which was just sent from Stripe. And we're saying request the body. Now we're saying sig header is equals to request the meta of HTTP signature. Now this is where we now try to validate if the request that is coming in is actually valid and is from Stripe. So what we're doing is saying stripe.webhook.construct events, and then we're passing in the payload, the sig header, and our Stripe secret key. Now, if there is an error, then it means that we need to return a 400 response, which stands for bad request. But if there's no error, we're just going to proceed to perform some processing. The reason why we need all of this is because technically any other malicious party, like a hacker or somebody with bad intent, would send a fake request body to this endpoint. And if we don't perform proper validation, that is to be sure that this data is coming from Stripe itself, then it means that anybody could just directly send post data to this our webhook and have them, like for example, create an invoice and mark it as completed or mark it as paid. So in order to prevent that, we just need to add all of this code right here for proper validation. And we're going to make use of our Stripe webhook secret in order to validate that the request is actually coming from Stripe itself. That's why Stripe generated all of that code for us. Now, the next step is that we need to handle successful and failed events. So at this point, we have already set up our webhook, which is right here. Now, the next thing that we need to do before setting up and before handling the success and failed events is that we need to create a URL to map to this endpoint. So I will just go to, first of all, let me save this. And I'll go to my URLs. And in here, I'm just going to put path. And after path, I'm going to paste stripe forward slash webhook. And this is going to be views.stripe webhook. And then the name is just going to be stripe webhook. And I'm going to save it. So that's just going to help us properly map to this URL. So it's going to be the base URL, which in this case is the ngrok generated URL forward slash stripe forward slash webhook forward slash webhook. So Stripe is going to send the post data to this endpoint. And then once that data gets sent, it's going to go to this URL. And then ultimately, all that data is going to come to the Stripe webhook views. Now, we need to handle successful and failed events. It says for successful events, we can proceed to create a new purchase history for this product and optionally email the user. Now, what that means is that if we head to the views in the code that Stripe generated for us, we can see that in this section, it handles a failed payment. So because it says if the type of the event is equals to checkout.session.async payment field, which was one of the events that we had selected when we created this webhook, it says that if the type is this, it means that obviously the payments failed. But if the type is checkout or session.completed, it means that the session is completed and it was successful. So inside each of these if blocks is now when we can perform some extra processing. So if the payment was successful, then we can go ahead and, for example, if you have a different model um, that handles like purchase history, what you can now do is create a new purchase history object right here, and then you can email the user optionally. So if I check my models right now, you can see that inside my payment app, I have a module called purchase history, and it just takes in a purchase ID, which by default is a UUID field. It takes in a product, takes in a purchase status, and then a date. And by default, is auto now added to equals true, which is the current date. So what we're just going to do is we are going to create, as it says, we can get the product ID and the user below. Okay, yeah, it says we can proceed to create a new purchase history for this product and optionally email the user. Now, the first thing we're going to do is it says we can get the product ID and the user email below. So just copy this and I will explain exactly what this means. So just head to your views.py file and let's handle the success first. I'll just paste that here. Now, if you look at the code, we said product ID is equals to session, which is this session, where is it? Which is this session variable right here, which has been created. We're saying session of metadata of product ID and session of metadata of user email. Now, if you remember, when we had created this checkout object right here, we had passed in this data in the metadata dictionary. So anytime a user makes a purchase, this data automatically gets saved in the metadata of this checkout session. Now, when that webhook gets sent by Stripe, we can then grab that data in the webhook post data. Sorry, in the post data, we can then grab those details, which is why I said it's important to pass in metadata sometimes. And you could pass in different types of data. For example, you could pass in the user's username, the user's, basically anything you want to pass in, you could pass it in into the metadata and get it using this method. Now, after doing that, I'm just going to, it now says next we can create a new purchase history. So what I'm just going to do is I will import this model class. Now this model class is inside my payments application. It just helps me basically store payments histories. So when a user makes a successful payment, it's going to create a new entry into the database and save that purchase. I'm just going to go to the top of my views, and at the top I'm going to say from dot models import purchase history. So I'm just trying to import purchase history from models file. Let me just make sure that that is in the right place. Exactly, it is. So after importing it, I will head back to my README file and I will first of all get the product using the ID. Now for you, it could be a different model. Like for example, you could have named your model something different, or it could be something else that you want to perform inside this webhook. So what I mean is, if a user successfully paid for something, you might want to perform a different operation. Or in my case, I just want to create a new checkout, a new purchase history for this user. And then you could also optionally decide to, perform various operations like emailing the user or doing something else. But for me, I would just like to first of all get the product. So I'm saying products or objects to get, and then ID is equals to product ID. And if you remember, that product ID is coming from here when we successfully passed in the product ID into the checkout session. So after getting the product, the next thing now is that we need to then create a new purchase history, because every purchase history is attached to a product via foreign key, which is why we need to grab the product first. So I will just come back here and copy the purchase history, and I will head back to my views and I'll paste it here. So I'm just trying to create a new purchase history by saying purchase history.objects.create, and then I was setting the products to this product right here, and then the purchase status is equals to true. So after doing that, all we need to do is just save it. Now, optionally, you could send a success email to the user and let them know that the purchase is So, for example, in your case, if you want to email the user, you could then make use of this user's email. Since you already have the email here, you could just write some code, maybe using Django's email class to send it, email backend and the email class to send it, to send the email to the user. But in my case, I will just stop here. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we now need to handle the failed purchase. So I will just copy all of this. It's pretty much the same thing. I'll head back to my views and I'll go right here into the first if. And then it says here, I'm just saying purchase issue the objects to create product is equals to get product. Now, the reason why I didn't say purchase status is equals to false is because by default, it is false. So if I don't specifically set this to true, it's just going to be false by default. So I'm just going to create it here. And then optionally too, you could choose to email the user. That is, after the purchase has failed, right here, I mean, you could choose to email the user, letting them know that the purchase didn't go through and it failed. So I will just save that. And then all we need to do next is just test the code. So it says generate a new ngrok URL for local development to replace the old one. But there really isn't any need because if we check, we see that our ngrok URL is still running and it runs for, I believe, a few hours before ngrok finally decides to kill it. So let's just make sure our local server is running. So I'm just going to clear it and run it again. So the reason why it crashed is because the point at the point that I had added, where's my settings? The point that I had added this Stripe webhook secret, the variable didn't exist in the env file, so that is why it crashed. But once I clear my screen right now and run it, it should run properly without any issues. So as you can see, it is starting to run. So what we're just going to do is, according to readme file, we're going to test to actually see if that data comes in. So let me just add a few print statements to show you that the data actually comes in. So in here, after all the processing has been done, I will just print the payload. I'll just print the payload to the terminal so that we can see what Stripe sends to us. So I will also go to my admin because once the webhook comes through, we will see that a new purchase history is going to get created. So we want to be able to see that in the admin dashboard. I'm just going to go to my localhost /admin, and then I'll go to purchase histories. So right now we have 0 purchase histories. So let's just test the code to see how well it works. So I'm going to refresh. Let's say I want to purchase this brown bag. Now, once I come here, I'm just going to click purchase. Okay, so it says we need to log in. So instead of testing it on this ngrok URL, actually, we could literally just test it using the localhost URL. So I'm just going to close this ngrok URL and I'm going to test it using this localhost URL. So let me try and purchase from a different product. I'm just going to keep going back, go to the home page, and I'm going to purchase this brown bag. I'll click purchase right here so we can purchase it. And then once I do so, we're going to be redirected to the Stripe page where we can purchase it. So as you can see, the price is $150. You can see the image and everything. So the email is still going to be like a test email. And then here, I'm going to put in my test card. And for the month, I'll just say 11/28. CVV is 123. And the name is going to be Jane Doe. Now, once I click pay, we should be taken to the success page to let us know that the payment was successful. So let's just see how that goes. Now we have been taken to the payment successful page. But let's head back to our terminal Now, once we check the terminal, you can see that a post request came into our endpoint. And you can see this is all the data that gets printed out. I will head to my uh, admin dashboard and refresh. And as you can see, we have a new purchase history object. And once I click it, you can see that the purchase was successful. So what does that mean? That means that Stripe was successfully able to purchase our request. Stripe was properly able to process our request, that is the payment. And then once it's processed it, the webhook itself sends that post data to our endpoint. Now, once I refresh, so right now you can see that this was the event that was sent recently. You can see it says checkout the session completed. So that means that this session was successfully, the payment was successfully processed and the webhook was sent. So you can see that this is what was sent. You can see the request, you can see the entire request body. So we can just keep scrolling, so we can see everything um, which was sent to our endpoint, and everything was printed out here in the terminal. So using this method, what that just simply means is that we can we have now been able to add Stripe integration into our project, and we have successfully created a Stripe webhook, which would then receive the payload from Stripe, and depending on if it is a successful purchase or a failed purchase, depending on that, it's going to create a purchase history, and then it's going to um, test the status of that purchase history. So in your case, you could decide to send an email. So for example, let's say you built an e-learning platform and you only want students to be enrolled when the payment has been confirmed. So once the payment has been completed and confirmed here, what you can now do is you can now write extra code to be able to enroll that student into the course after it has been confirmed. So that is the use of a webhook, and you can see that it is very, very useful because we don't want a case where a user is already enrolled into the course even when the payment hasn't been confirmed. So that is all we're going to talk about in this video today. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask it and I will definitely get back to you. And also, if you want to get all the code if you want to get all the code to this project, there's going to be a link in the description which will take you to the GitHub repository where you can get all the code. And also, I have some links to my community, which I'm trying to build. So the Telegram channel and the Discord server. If you would like to join the Telegram channel or the Discord server, please use the link in the description to join. And it's going to be really, really a great place to learn. As if you have any questions, you could directly ask me, or if you have any contributions or something you would like to share, or a tutorial you would like to see, you can basically drop them there, and it's a way to reach me directly. So thank you for watching this video, guys, and I will see you in the next one.